Yo, what's going on, guys? My name is Alex, and with the season really around the corner at this point, I felt like it was a good time to go over every single major award for the NBA. And for today's video, we're going to start off with the MVP award. And I wanted to, kind of go over kind of the guys that have been in the MVP race for probably the past 3 or 4 years. Guys like Jokic, Giannis, and Embiid. Talk about where I think they stand going into this season. And then after that, I have a couple little dark horses, guys that I think are going to probably be in the running, but ultimately might not make it. But I first want to start off with the player who did win the MVP award last season, and that's Joel Embiid. Look, whether you think Joel Embiid deserved the MVP award or not, he definitely had an MVP caliber season, and he has shown us over these past couple of years to really be that MVP caliber player. So will Embiid be in the MVP race this year? There's no doubt in my mind that he will, especially with what's going on with James Harden. I still think the 76ers can win a good amount of games, and if the Sixers are winning a lot of games, Embiid continues to be a statistical beast, and Harden continues to be a problem, and maybe the return they get for Harden isn't all that crazy, then I think Embiid will definitely be getting some MVP love. However, I just have a really hard time seeing him winning it back-to-back. And the reason why I say this is because even though I don't agree with his ideology, these NBA voters really take into account what happens in the past years, especially in the playoffs. And after what we saw from Embiid in the second round, blowing a 3-2 lead against the Celtics and just not really playing all that great either, I just have a really hard time believing that the award winners are actually going to vote Embiid because they're going to hold the last playoffs against him. The same thing happened with Jokic last year. They said, hey, he lost in the first round against the Warriors, and they would say that he played trash or was definitely not at the peak of his powers, even though that was completely incorrect. But they held that against Jokic last year, and it's a big reason why Embiid won it last year. Same thing happened with Giannis when Jokic won his first MVP award. I believe that was the year the Bucks lost to the Heat in the bubble. In the first round, they lost in like 5 games, something like that. They held that against Giannis, which is a big reason why he didn't win the award in Jokic's first MVP year. So going into this season, I can definitely see that happening again, despite what I think Embiid is going to do statistically, and despite what I think the 76ers can be as a team. They're going to be a top 3 to 4 team in the East. And it ultimately just might not matter how great of a season Embiid has, because the voters are just going to hold what he did in the playoffs against him. And again, I think this is completely unfair. I would not hold this against him. I would still put him into that race. However, I just think that's what's ultimately going to stop him from winning the award this year. And then we have Jokic, and Jokic, I think he should have won last year, so in this case, he has a very good chance of possibly winning 4 in a row. But this year, it can be a potential year where Jokic gets his 3rd MVP, which is quite insane. But yeah, statistically, Jokic is going to be there for sure, and I think the Nuggets are probably going to be the 1 or 2 seed this year. I think they have still a lot to prove. I think they want to prove to everyone that, hey, like last year was not a fluke, and that we are definitely a championship caliber team. And I think Jokic, especially from what we've seen in media day, has definitely spread that message. So with the Nuggets being a 1 or 2 seed, and with Jokic being the best player in the world, he's going to put up the statistics. I think he has a very good shot at winning the MVP award, especially if the voters decide that, hey, you know what, we messed up last year, we're going to make it up to him this year. I could definitely see that happening. And again, I don't agree with the ideology of, oh, let's make it up to him. I think that's kind of whack. You should have just gave it to him the last year. But that's just how the voters are. The voters are kind of stupid, and that's just something that, as NBA fans, we just kind of have to deal with, honestly. Now looking at Giannis Antetokounmpo, and yes, despite him being a 1st seed in the East and losing in the first round against the Heat, an 8th seed, I think we can give Giannis, and I think the voters will give Giannis a lot of leeway, especially since he did miss like half of the series. And I think a lot of them would probably believe that, hey, if Giannis was there the entire time, the Bucks would probably win that series. And while there probably will be some people who don't agree with that statement or that kind of hypothetical situation of, you know, hey, if Giannis was healthy, the Bucks probably win that series. There's going to be some people who don't agree with that, but it's probably a very small percentage, so I don't think that's really going to affect him going into the season. But I swear, ever since like 2019, Giannis has been a top 3 to top 4 MVP candidate. I don't see why this stops. Now, it will be interesting what happens, especially now since the Bucks have Damian Lillard. Is Damian Lillard going to be taking some of these MVP votes away from Giannis? I think adding Damian Lillard will definitely make the Bucks better, and they could potentially win a bunch of games, probably high 50s, borderline 60 win team. However, if we look back when Steph and KD were teamed up on the Warriors, they just were not going to win MVPs because they were just both great players and they were going to steal votes away from each other. I think we can obviously say that Giannis is the best player on this team, but there are going to be people who will probably say, hey, this Bucks team, while still great, adding Damian Lillard made him so much better, and maybe that gives him a couple of votes just to the point where Giannis doesn't win the award. And that could potentially affect him. I don't think it should, because I think it's clear that Giannis is the best player, and any sort of success that the Bucks have, I think, starts and ends with Giannis. But it could be interesting, especially since Giannis has never had a teammate like this before, and every time that he has won the MVP award, his second best player has pretty much been Chris Middleton. So, and that's different from Damian Lillard. So again, it'll be very interesting to see how it all kind of plays out. And with those three guys, those are guys who have won the MVP awards before. Some guys who I think won't really be in the race, but have won MVP awards before. I think Curry definitely is a guy that we should be on the lookout for. I think his chances are very low. I think the Warriors are going to be kind of iffy this year. I don't know if they're going to win enough games to truly put Curry into that MVP race, but just as a player, I think Curry has MVP seasons pretty much ever since his prime started and he won his first MVP, and when he's been healthy as well. He's had MVP caliber seasons, but it has a lot to do with, Kevin Durant either being on the team or just not winning enough games to truly win the award. But I think Steph is one of the best players in the world, and when you're one of the best players in the world, you're going to be put into these MVP conversations. Now, for some guys who haven't won the MVP award, but I could definitely see winning it this year, we'll start off with Luka Doncic. This guy continues to be an MVP favorite for a lot of people, but what really holds him back is just the lack of success on the team. And kind of similar with Giannis, with, how is it going to work out with Damian Lillard possibly taking votes away? If the Mavericks are somehow a top 3 seed, I think a lot of that is going to be attributed to Kyrie Irving. And the reason why I say this is because if they were to get to a top 3 seed, I feel like Kyrie would have to have one of his best seasons in his career. This Mavericks roster, in my opinion, is very lackluster. So if the Mavericks were truly going to be one of the best teams in the West, at least record-wise, of course, Luka would have to be a big part of it, but I think Kyrie would also have to be a really big part of it as well. Jason Tatum is another guy who finished 4th in the MVP race, I believe. He continues to be one of the best players in the league, continues to improve as a player. The Celtics are always at the top of the East. They always make deep postseason runs, and of course, statistically, Tatum is always there as well. I just think the big reason why Tatum never really wins these awards is because there's just better candidates. So for Tatum to truly win the MVP award, I think the Celtics have to have one of the best records, and it has to not really be close. If the Celtics become like a 60-win team, despite adding Jrue Holiday and Porzingis, I think Tatum would actually get a lot of credit for that, especially if we continue to see him improve and still put up the stats. That is definitely a scenario that I think could potentially happen with how great that starting 5 is for Boston. The Celtics are one of the best teams, not only in the East, but also in the league. So I can see Tatum definitely getting a lot of credit for that. But players like Jaylen Brown, who continue to get better as the years go along, could also potentially take some votes away, but not really too many. And for the last guy I really wanted to talk about in this MVP race, and I think he's the biggest dark horse in this MVP race, is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The Thunder were one game away from being a 500 team last season. They were so close to making it in the playoffs through the play-in tournament, and they played the entire season last year without their big lottery pick, Chet Holmgren. And with him coming back this season, J-Dub making improvements, Josh Giddey making improvements as well. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander having one of his best seasons last year. He's going to continue to improve. He was 5th in the MVP race last year, averaging like 31 points a game. It's obvious that the MVP voters were not shy to put Shai onto that MVP race, even though they weren't even a 500 team, even though OKC wasn't even a 500 team. I'm very high on this OKC roster, so if the Thunder can potentially win 10 more games and become a borderline 50-win team, I could see a very good argument for Shai being an MVP this year because he's going to put up the stats. But if the Thunder make significant improvements as a team, I think Shea is going to get a lot of credit for that, and I think it would be very well deserving as well. All that being said, where do I rank these MVP candidates kind of from the bottom, and who do I think is ultimately going to win? To be honest, I don't really know the order, but if I could give you my top 3, for number 1, I think I would probably more likely lean towards Jokic winning it this year. With number 2, I think I'm going to go Giannis with this one. Yes, Dame can potentially take some votes away from Giannis, but again, I think Giannis is by far and away that best player on the Bucks team, and I think the Bucks are going to win a lot of games this year, and Giannis is going to get a lot of credit for that. And again, he continues to be a top 3 to 4 candidate, so I can definitely see him being here at number 2. And he also hasn't won the MVP award for a couple of years at this point, so maybe the voters are a little bit more willing to give him some more votes compared to the last couple of years. And then for my number 3 spot, I think I'm going to lean towards Tatum on this one. Yes, again, Embiid is probably going to be up there with the MVP candidates, but again, I just don't see the voters voting for this guy, especially when it comes to the end of the season. I think the voters are going to hold the playoffs against him last year, which again, I don't agree with. But it's going to happen, I'm telling you right now. So with the Celtics being one of the better teams in the league, I think Tatum is going to get a lot of credit for that. And even though I did bring up Jaylen Brown is probably going to take a little bit of the votes away, again, I don't think it's going to be enough for Tatum to completely fall out of this race. So I'm going to put him here at number 3. And again, my dark horse would be SGA. I would probably put him at number 4. So there we go. There's my top 4. SGA, I think, has huge potential. He is already a borderline top 10 player. I probably have him around 13 or 14, but if he continues to improve and the Thunder are one of the best teams in the league, probably a top 4 seed in the West, man, SGA is going to get votes. Well, those are my thoughts on the MVP race. Let me know down below what y'all think. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and sub. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs by the end of the year, so it means a lot. Check out my socials down below in the description. You can also check out this video somewhere on the screen. Anyways, I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.